Welcome back to PCW, where today we are talking about WWE Smackdown. WWE Smackdown this week came after a difficult day of releases and was really under a lot of pressure to try and make people forget basically about 205 Live in its entirety after getting rid of almost all of the staff there. Also, one of its premier tag teams in Breezango, who really made Smackdown into what it is, had also been released, so they were under a lot of pressure to make you forget. They didn't manage it. For PCW, I'm Tom Collihew. Be sure to click like on the video, subscribe if you haven't, and let's get started. Smackdown this week featured very limited Roman Reigns, but still started with a Roman and Jimmy Uso segment. Jimmy has essentially replaced Jay and is now under the responsibility of becoming main event Uso himself, and that is something that we will see woven throughout the show, even though it doesn't feature all that clearly. After this, our opening promo was Bianca Belair, who came down to essentially celebrate Bianca Belair. Very standard Bianca Belair promo here. She would be joined by Seth Rollins, and briefly there would be the inclination of a friendship between the two before Seth Rollins would go full Seth Rollins and remind everyone that's not what he's here for. The eventual match that we got to here after about 15 minutes of talking was a mixed tag match, Bianca Belair and Cesaro on one side and Seth Rollins and Bayley on the other. It looks like these are two matches we're going to see again at Money in the Bank in the build-up to Seth taking on Edge at SummerSlam, Cesaro probably going to Raw, and of course the rematch between Bianca Belair and Bayley leading towards Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks again at SummerSlam. The match itself served one clear purpose, and that was essentially to give Bayley an option. To give her the option to basically say, I beat you, I deserve another championship match. There is a high possibility of this one being hair versus hair. In the surprise emotional moment of the week, Shinsuke Nakamura came down to the ring to celebrate being the king. You'd expect an interruption, you'd expect some sort of attack. That didn't happen. Rick Boogs introduced Nakamura. Nakamura had a big dance, he looked great in his white, and he just looked fantastic. Backstage though, Kayla Braxton approached King Corbin, or Baron Corbin now that he's no longer king. And there was just that little emotional moment of Baron Corbin looking so depressed and unhappy. Genuinely feel like we might be getting a face turn after 7 years of heel on the main roster. I am that rarest of things, a Baron Corbin fan. And to be fair, 7 years on the main roster and all he's had is a very brief United States Championship run. I'd be turning him face. I believe in the guy, and I think he can probably go far. In an interesting bit of foreboding, we went backstage to Adam Pearce and Sonya Deville, who were rocking out to Nakamura's theme. That wasn't the piece of foreboding that I'm talking about. Seth Rollins would enter, having competed and essentially won his match, and put his name down as a potential competitor for Roman Reigns. This suggests some sort of changing of the guard, but we don't know who's going to be changing what guard where, because Seth Rollins right now is not ideally placed to compete with Roman. But as we'll find out later, there isn't really anyone else. Raw might have established 7/8 of its Money in the Bank competitors, apologies for stumbling over that one, but SmackDown didn't go that way, really only establishing 2 of the 8 so far. The first one would be decided between Big E and Apollo Crews, a match we've seen countless times before. This time Commander Aziz tried to get involved and got thrown out, and it was Big E with a clean win. Somehow I don't think this is going to lead to another Intercontinental Championship match. I'm guessing the plan here was for this match to be between Big E and Aleister Black for the qualifier, with Aleister Black going on to Money in the Bank. However, Big E will now take the opportunity instead. I'm fine with this. I think he's long overdue a Money in the Bank introduction, and I think when you consider that we have Ricochet, John Morrison, Matt Riddle already, Big E adds a lot in terms of power more than anything. As it turns out, it looks like Kevin Owens will not be taking a prolonged break after all, because Sami Zayn would be interviewed backstage, rage against the machine, celebrate his victory, and ultimately be told that next week he will be in a last man standing match against Kevin Owens. I can see Sami Zayn winning this, and there were hints of last man standing over the last few weeks, but honestly I'm just really excited for the match. Even including champions, there are not enough women in the SmackDown women's roster to have 4 qualifying matches for Money in the Bank, so they had to do something different. Sonya Deville would come down, introduce Carmella as essentially her first pick, which makes sense. Carmella does have pedigree in this particular arena. Carmella's place would be guaranteed, but she'd be interrupted by Liv Morgan, who essentially would say, I want a shot instead. Deville would make a match and we'd have 4 minutes between Carmella and Liv Morgan picking up the win to earn her place in Money in the Bank as well, meaning that Carmella and Liv Morgan have already joined Asuka, Naomi, Bliss and Cross. I still can't imagine anyone other than Alexa Bliss winning this match. Our final match of the night was newly main event Jimmy Uso taking on Dolph Ziggler, and it was just before the main event, so I don't think it quite qualifies. It's confusing here because Jimmy Uso is definitely being painted as a face, even though he's aligned with Roman Reigns, who is a heel. So logically, this was a heel versus heel match, and kind of showed the lack of depth overall available in the face side in WWE right now. The match would last 10 minutes and would be fairly enjoyable. Two very talented wrestlers going at it. Dolph Ziggler can make anyone look good, and Jimmy Uso certainly lived up to his side of things, even though he's not quite as honed as Jey Uso has become in his main event push. Jimmy would pick up the win here after a fairly grueling match, which I think was oversold slightly, but he picked up the win with a super kick, the 1-2-3, and then Roman would make his entrance immediately afterwards, basically telling Jimmy, or Paul Heyman would, stay backstage. After taking about 10 minutes to walk to the ring and glare straight down the camera in a way that made me a bit excitable, Roman Reigns actually got to his main event segment a State of the Universal Championship address. Essentially, Paul Heyman, in a rare speaking role this time, said that everybody who challenged Roman Reigns had been slain and that there was absolutely no one left. Turns out one of those people who had been slain didn't get the memo, because Edge made a shock return, arriving to attack both Roman and Jimmy Uso and eventually stand tall. It looks like we're going to get Roman versus Edge at Money in the Bank. There was an awkward moment to close the show when Edge stood in the ring saying, "Where you at, Roman?" And if he'd looked slightly to his right, there's Roman, just ready to answer your question. Bit annoying in that regard. SmackDown was a good show this week. They've really honed what they've been doing, but ultimately we did have rematches here. We've seen a lot of Seth versus Cesaro, we've seen a lot of Bianca Belair versus Bayley, we've seen a lot of Carmella versus Liv Morgan, and we've seen a lot of Big E versus Apollo Crews. This leaves only one match to feel new, and that was Dolph Ziggler and Jimmy Uso. That said, it flew because of a lot of individual nuance. Use of Sonya Deville to break up Liv Morgan and Carmella hinted at something more. Dancing backstage was fun. Baron Corbin really tugged at my heartstrings, and we saw a little bit of evolution in the Jimmy Uso story, even though for me, it's still far too close to the Jey Uso story we've already seen. I would recommend checking out this SmackDown. The return from Edge, though, doesn't suggest great things from me. He did not pull his weight in the WrestleMania feud. However, this time round, he's bulked up a little, and he will take on Roman without Daniel Bryan being involved. Rumours for SummerSlam, though, is still Edge versus Seth Rollins, non-title. Let me know what you thought of SmackDown down in the comments. I've been Tom Colligue for PCW, and we'll see you next time.